were screaming and yelling all the time, and then he wasn't one to sleep.
I'm not going to let her get away with this. I'm going to do everything I can to her. And I don't
She wasn't crying for cameras this time. There were no producers whispering lines or makeup artists fixing concealer between takes. When Jasmine was pulled aside by immigration officers at a U.S. airport, she wasn't a reality star anymore. She was a foreign national, suddenly flagged in a system that now saw her as a liability, not a storyline. And unlike the show's edited breakdowns or staged goodbyes, this moment wasn't scripted. It was abrupt, cold, real. By the time she realized what was happening, her suitcase was being wheeled away, and her phone was already in someone else's hands. What fans thought was a dramatic 90-day fiancé breakup on TV was actually the smokescreen. Something darker had been happening all along, far from the tearful confessionals and awkward green card interviews. Because what went down with Jasmine Pineda wasn't about love. Not really. It was about betrayal, silence, and what happens when the people holding the cameras know more than the person in front of them. This wasn't the ending Jasmine thought she signed up for when she fell into TLC's world of borderline love stories and visa timelines. Once framed as one of the most chaotic but compelling characters on the show, Jasmine lit up the screen with her fiery outbursts, raw vulnerability, and emotional monologues that turned her into a fan favorite for some, and a meme for others. But while viewers joked about her meltdowns and headband collection, they missed something much more alarming. Jasmine was being isolated, piece by piece. Here's what didn't make it into the final cut. No exit statement. No public goodbye. No Instagram post from the show. Jasmine didn't wrap up. She was removed. Quietly. Efficiently. Like a character written out mid-season with no closure, no comment, and no credit. By the time the dust settled, Jasmine had become the single most erased figure in recent 90-day history. Which begs the question, why? If everything was normal, why act like she never existed? This wasn't a scheduling issue or contract expiration. According to insiders, the silence around Jasmine wasn't accidental. Crew members had been told, don't mention her name. Producers scrubbed footage. Editors reworked existing scenes to pull her face from the promos. TLC's social pages stopped tagging her altogether. Not even a neutral "we wish her the best." Because anything official would mean acknowledging that something went down. And what allegedly happened was legal, ugly, and potentially explosive. By now, you're probably wondering, what exactly did they want hidden? What was the network afraid might come out? And how did Gino, the man who was once crying on the floor for her, end up being the person who took everything away? The answer starts not with romance, but with ratings. Because Jasmine wasn't just cast. She was crafted. When Jasmine first appeared on screen, she didn't just enter the room, she detonated in it. Her presence was loud, unfiltered, and full of emotion the camera loved. One minute she was sobbing, the next she was throwing shade with surgical precision, and fans couldn't look away. She didn't act. She reacted. And producers knew exactly what they had on their hands. A ratings machine wrapped in lashes and layered in red flags. Jasmine wasn't reality TV material. She was the show. Her fights with Gino weren't arguments. They were episodes by themselves. Whether it was her accusing him of flirting online or screaming about his infamous sugar baby past, there was one constant. Jasmine gave the show chaos on demand. Viewers stayed for her meltdowns, rewound for her insults, and debated online whether she was spiraling or strategizing. And pretty soon, clips of her were racking up millions of views across social feeds before the episodes even aired. She was trending before the intro music even finished. What fans didn't see was how often producers allegedly poked the bear. According to former crew members, Jasmine's emotional outbursts were sometimes the result of carefully placed questions designed to get her going. Want tension? Ask about Gino texting his ex. Want tears? Bring up her fear of being sent back to Panama. It wasn't manipulation in the most obvious sense. Nobody said go scream. But the environment she was in? That was curated. Always just enough stress, just enough uncertainty to keep her reaction raw. The cameras looked passive, but they were watching her like hawks, waiting for the moment she cracked and offering comfort only after they got the shot. And Jasmine? She didn't see it as exploitation. At first, she thought it was loyalty. She gave producers access to everything. Her texts, her worries, even her body insecurities. In interviews, she trusted them like friends, sometimes even more than she trusted Gino. It's easy to forget that if you're a foreign national on a visa tied to a relationship, and that relationship is tied to a network, that network starts to look like a lifeline. Jasmine said yes, not because she was naive, but because no one ever told her to say no. And here's where it gets tricky. TLC's contracts with international cast members often leave a lot unsaid. There are clauses, sure, but they rely heavily on what's assumed, not spelled out. Like the idea that producers will help with immigration paperwork, or that legal pitfalls will be flagged before they become life-altering issues. These aren't promises. Sometimes they're not even on paper. But they're implied loudly enough that people believe them, especially people like Jasmine, who signed up thinking that the more she gave, the more they'd protect her. But what happens when giving everything doesn't keep you safe, and instead becomes the very reason you get left behind? It wasn't a big dramatic reveal. There were no cameras rolling, no music swelling under a confessional. There was just a phone call from someone who wasn't even part of production, and one sentence that made Jasmine go numb. Gino had allegedly filed a $70,000 civil lawsuit against her, behind her back. While they were still living together, while she was still filming scenes about building a future with him. Not from TLC. Not even from Gino. She found out from someone completely unrelated to the show, who stumbled across the case and assumed she knew. She didn't. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a rumor, some crazy misunderstanding. But by the time she got her hands on the case paperwork, there was no denying it. His name, her name, the full amount. It was real, and nobody, not her partner, not the production staff who knew, not a single person she trusted, had said a word. And while Jasmine had fought with Gino on camera more times than fans could count, nothing prepared her for the stab of reading a legal document accusing her of financial damages and misrepresentation, filed by the one man she thought wouldn't turn on her like that. She showed up to film like normal the next day. Face beat, mic clipped, holding back rage. But as the crew got ready to roll, Jasmine reached her limit. She confronted producers. Then she broke down. Not her usual brand of performative crying or throw pillow launching rage. This wasn't for show. This was a collapse. According to people present, she screamed for answers, demanded to know why, when, and how everyone let her stand in front of cameras, smiling, while legal action was being processed behind her back. Everything she was trying to build, a green card, a steady life, even some stability, suddenly felt like it had been a performance. For everyone but her. Production stopped on the spot. Not paused. Stopped. Security was allegedly called. Cameras stayed down. Crew members were shaken. Jasmine, once the emotional centerpiece of a multi-million-dollar storyline, was now considered a liability. And still, no one explained what the lawsuit could mean for her visa, for her contract, or for her future in the U.S. Gino disappeared. TLC stayed silent. Their storyline was supposed to be about redemption, but behind the scenes, this was closer to sabotage. Then, things got worse. Legal observers say a civil lawsuit, especially between cohabitating partners, can carry heavy weight if one party is relying on the other for immigration sponsorship. If Gino listed anything that implied fraud or manipulation, even if it wasn't true, it could trigger scrutiny from immigration officials. Civil cases don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, just enough to raise questions, and Jasmine's visa was already in a sensitive transitional phase. So, the big question wasn't just why the lawsuit was filed, it was whether the timing was strategic and how long the network had known. After the lawsuit was filed and producers allegedly knew it, filming didn't stop. It accelerated. Jasmine was still being directed to talk about wedding dresses, life in America, future kids. She was being told to smile and soften, to patch things up. Even when she had no idea she was standing in a storyline already doomed. And this wasn't speculation. Internal emails, according to sources close to former crew, surfaced later. Some of them reportedly included phrases like her emotional wave should peak just before the finale. Another, chillingly blunt, alluded to timing the breakdown to match the season arc. Imagine reading that and realizing they were watching your pain like a stock trend, waiting for the big crash. Because that's when ratings climb. Jasmine wasn't a participant anymore. She was a plot device. One who didn't even know the real story she was in. Fans were watching what looked like a rocky but hopeful reconciliation. Producers were allegedly filming a breakdown in slow motion, making sure it hit right when the audience engagement dipped. And while she was spiraling off camera, trying to understand legal documents she barely had time to read, the directors were coaching her into redemption scenes she never believed in. She was confused, angry, but she still showed up. In her mind, she had no choice. Walking away meant losing everything. Her temporary housing, her stipend, and whatever thin layer of protection she thought the network might provide. She didn't know they'd already begun removing that protection quietly, one silent decision at a time. What no one told Jasmine was that once a reality star becomes unpredictable behind the scenes, producers don't fix it, they frame it. Her shifting moods weren't unpacked, they were spotlighted. Her anxiety wasn't addressed, it was redirected. And confessionals that could have clarified the real reason for her stress were re-edited or tossed aside entirely. On air, she was dramatic. Off air, she was privately panicked, and the wide gap between the two was growing faster than she could emotionally process. Multiple former crew say they raised concerns, allegedly flagged how serious Jasmine's legal tension was becoming. But the chain of communication in production isn't built for accountability. It's built for momentum. As long as she wasn't arrested, injured, or publicly calling out filming practices, episodes kept rolling. If someone cried too hard, too often, it got bookmarked. If someone cracked on camera, even better. In Jasmine's case, breaking down wasn't disqualifying. It was bankable. Producers had seen this before. Pain plus build-up cug views. And loyalty often makes a cast more compliant. She didn't know that the very thing she thought made her valuable, her trust and willingness to be vulnerable, was also being used to mask her unraveling. And by the time she realized the storyline was fake, the consequences were already real. The court summons came quietly. A routine appearance. Nothing dramatic. No flashing lights or handcuffs. But for someone like Jasmine, whose entire U.S. residency hung on paperwork and promises, it was the beginning of something irreversible. She was handed a date, told it was procedural. What she didn't know was that showing up would open a door she couldn't close, and that the system waiting on the other side wasn't built to catch her if anything slipped. When she walked into that courtroom, she thought she was there to deal with financial accusations. The $70,000 lawsuit. She didn't understand how fast immigration concerns could attach themselves to unrelated civil claims. The moment the court started reviewing personal details connected to Gino's claim, questions started surfacing about Jasmine's visa, her dependability, and whether she had violated any conditions by, say, not disclosing financial disputes. This wasn't about guilt. It was about narrative. And the story that Gino's legal filing had accidentally or intentionally constructed painted Jasmine as unstable, financially manipulative, and unreliable. And by this point, TLC was already gone. No lawyers, no publicist, no phone call explaining her rights. After all the seasons she filmed, all the scenes she delivered, and all the ratings she drove, she was standing there with no support, just her own confusion. A stack of forms she barely understood, and no real legal muscle to fight back. People once cheered for her to win love. Now, nobody even responded to her emails. She was briefly detained, not as a criminal, but as someone caught in the crossfire between civil documentation and immigration procedure. A mismatch, a red flag, an unresolved gray area that gave immigration officers the space to say, "Not our problem." And once that call was made, the next step was simple: removal. Jasmine didn't get to say goodbye. Not to her followers, not to her so-called husband, not to the life she thought she was building one green card step at a time. She was loaded onto a flight and sent back to Panama with a few bags, broken trust, and a head full of questions she would never get answered. And here's the part that never made it to air. Jasmine wasn't the wild card. She wasn't the problem. She was a woman wrapped in chaos on screen because it was safer to perform emotions than admit how dangerously isolated she actually was. When she yelled, people listened. When she cried, they clipped it. But when she really needed help, silence. Absolute freezing silence. They told her she was part of a love story, but treated her like a storyline, used up and deleted. Back in Panama, Jasmine wasn't quiet for long. Heartbroken, yes. Humiliated, definitely. But now she was also furious. And finally out of contract. She started going through everything. Every old email she kept. Every casual promise made by a producer. Every voice note or screenshot she never deleted. Most reality stars don't keep this stuff. Jasmine did. Not because she thought she'd need it for legal proof, but because, somewhere deep down, she never fully trusted what she was being told. Now, with her name scrubbed from TLC's digital footprint and her image quietly erased from upcoming seasons, she wanted to know, how much had they really known? Some of the earliest cracks came from people she once trusted behind the scenes. Former producers and low-level crew, now no longer under activenda, started reaching out, not with sympathy posts, but with guilt. Quietly, they admitted they'd been uncomfortable during filming, that they'd pushed her through scenes after the lawsuit was already active, that edits were deliberately angled to paint her as increasingly unhinged, all while omitting entire conversations that could have shown why she was actually spiraling. Then, something unexpected landed in her inbox. A file. Production notes. Allegedly real and unedited. Not polished summaries meant for public relations teams, but raw snapshots of how the network framed storylines as they unfolded. Words like containment strategy and controlled escalation jumped off the page. A reference to holding off on disclosure until after the finale hinted that producers may have known about the lawsuit weeks before Jasmine did. These weren't smoking guns, but they smelled like censorship, calculated crisis control rather than chaotic miscommunication. The big reveal? This didn't just happen to Jasmine. It was allowed to happen, maybe even engineered to. What made it worse was the growing realization that she likely wasn't the first. Industry insiders told her off the record that foreign cast members were rarely given legal clarity, that things were often handled verbally. No paper trail, no commitment. Keep smiling, keep filming, don't overthink the legal stuff. It'll all get taken care of. That was the script they were all fed behind the scenes. Jasmine had the receipts to prove she was misled. But what she didn't know yet was whether this was a personal vendetta, someone targeting her specifically, or whether she'd simply been caught in a system designed to chew up vulnerability and spit out drama. Because if they did this once and nobody stopped it, who else had it happen to? And how long until the next Jasmine disappears? Inside TLC, the reaction wasn't public. It wasn't loud. But it was immediate. Jasmine's disappearance didn't get a press release. It got a memo. Internally, departments started scrubbing communications, reviewing contracts, holding quiet meetings. Nothing explosive. Nothing visible to outsiders. Just silence, followed by sudden shifts. Certain producers were reassigned. Some casting staff rotated out without warning. And from that point on, there was a noticeable chill around bringing in foreign talent. Without saying it, the industry was treating Jasmine's case like a close call. Something that came a little too close to going viral, too close to becoming a lawsuit, too close to opening up a part of reality TV nobody wanted audiences looking at. Especially the part about how easy it is to risk someone's legal status without accepting a shred of responsibility when it backfires. It wasn't just 90 Day Fiancé. Other reality shows that featured international contestants or immigration themes also began quietly tweaking their processes. Not out of conscience, out of fear. Some production companies started requiring tighter legal waivers. Others broke contact the moment visa questions came up. Several ex-producers reportedly confirmed they'd been told to avoid anything with active immigration risk. Jasmine's fallout wasn't being fixed. It was being avoided. Across private group chats and alumni DMs, something else started happening. Former cast members, people who'd been through their own chaotic seasons, meltdowns, and on-camera humiliations, started reaching out to Jasmine. Not publicly, but quietly, sharing their own suspicions, regrets, telling her they'd had questions about contracts, that they also felt coerced into storylines, and that they too were promised things that never showed up in paper. One former participant allegedly told her they were encouraged to lie about the timeline of their relationship so it would fit the episode arc. Another said producers kept telling them problems are part of the process when their fiancé's visa got delayed because of documents the network had allegedly assured would be handled. And more than one told Jasmine they wish they had recorded more, saved more, protected themselves better. But when she asked if they'd back her up if this ever went public, silence. Not because they didn't believe her, but because they didn't feel safe. Nobody wanted to be the second domino, and Jasmine had already proven what happens to the first. That fear is exactly what kept things quiet for years. Nobody wants to go up against a network with money, lawyers, and NDAs that go pages long. Especially not when you're a former star who left the show confused, burned out, or deported. Speaking out felt like career suicide, even if your career wasn't fame, just survival. For many, talking meant reliving trauma, putting relationships at risk, or confirming things they signed contracts not to discuss. Only Jasmine had already lost everything. She had nothing left for them to take, and that's what made her dangerous. Behind closed doors, some newer cast members were privately warned by others to be careful. Don't believe everything producers say. Don't rely on the show to explain your legal risks. Don't give too much access to your private documents. Don't assume anyone's telling you the whole truth. Publicly, nothing changed. The episodes kept airing. The trailers stayed bubbly. The social media pages stayed shallow. Viewers still argued over matchmaking, breakups, and whether Jasmine deserved what happened to her. But inside casting rooms, phone calls got shorter. Legal vetting got stricter. And in more than one incident, immigration-heavy storylines were shelved altogether for pacing reasons, code for liability. All because one storyline too many went off the rails, not on TV, but in real life. And when it did, It wasn't just messy. It exposed the soft underbelly of one of reality TV's biggest franchises, that the drama they build is only fun if nobody gets permanently hurt. But this time, someone did. And now, they can't predict who'll speak next. Panama was never supposed to be the end. Not for Jasmine. Not like this. She arrived not as a returning citizen, but as a woman removed, confused, exhausted, and emotionally spent in a way that cameras could never capture. No glam team. No closure scene. Just silence and the weight of a life that had been edited into profit. In the weeks that followed, she barely posted. No dramatic clapbacks. No attempt to spin her side with a YouTube tell-all or sobbing livestream. Instead, she started collecting notes, emails, screenshots, dates and details that now lived in folders on her laptop instead of Dropboxes owned by production. Anything that could help her make sense of what she'd just survived. Because surviving was exactly what it was. The Jasmine people remembered, the one barking over Gino's Instagram DMs or threatening to go back to Panama every other episode, was a character. And everyone, including Jasmine, knew she leaned into that chaos. It was part of the deal: show the wild, get the screen time. But now, another version of her was surfacing. The woman left behind. The one who didn't scream when the cameras stopped rolling. Because nobody was listening anyway. The shift was painful, not just for Jasmine, but for fans who started asking the same question over and over. How much of her downfall was real, and how much was manufactured? It's one thing to make cringe TV. It's another to build entire arcs around unraveling someone emotionally and never stepping in when things spiral beyond what they can manage. For international cast members whose documents, lives, and actual livelihoods are often indirectly tied to how they perform on reality television, the line between content and exploitation is razor thin. And Jasmine didn't slip past it. She was pushed. She gave them vulnerability, and they edited it into volatility. She gave them total access, and they used it to break her timeline into digestible drama. The same moments she thought showed growth were repackaged into gifs of her panicking, yelling, begging. On her worst days, she was the show's best asset. And when it finally cost her everything, that same show didn't protect, warn, or apologize. Only deleted. Maybe Jasmine wasn't perfect. Maybe she played the reality game too hard and too loud. But the game was never designed for her to win. And when the system finally discarded her, what she was left with wasn't scandal. It was silence. Friends gone. Trust broken. A reputation crafted by people who never had to deal with the aftermath. And the real twist? The audience only ever saw one Jasmine. Until now. Jasmine's not bluffing. She's not rushing either. Back in Panama, she's no longer in survival mode. She's studying, sorting through everything like a puzzle that was thrown at her without a picture on the box. Every email she saved. Every text that sounded just a little too rehearsed. Every off-the-record promise whispered by producers who smiled with their eyes on the view count. She's gathering more than evidence. She's gathering leverage. But if you were expecting her to explode back onto the internet with a lawsuit-ready TikTok rant, you don't understand Jasmine. She's calculating now. Careful. According to people close to her, she's already spoken to legal advisors about her options. Not because she's chasing a payout, but because she wants power, proof, and protection from this happening again. The same network that once portrayed her as messy now fears her precision. They know she has the raw timeline. And they know she's angry for the right reasons. And while there's been no official lawsuit, at least not yet, that silence is what's got insiders sweating. TLC isn't acting like this'll blow over. They're acting like it might blow up. Legal departments, according to 2 former staffers, started retroactively combing through contracts. Not just Jasmine's, but others too. Legal language got tightened. Future cast onboarding got more scripted. Even minor roles now come with stricter union-vetted language. Not because they've changed their ethics, because they can't afford another Jasmine. Multiple sources say higher-ups are practically allergic to her name in meetings. One person allegedly let it slip during a planning session and was told to never bring up ghosts. Ghosts, in this case, are what TLC fears most. Cast members smart enough to survive their camera edit and still stick around long enough to tell the real story. Because when legal gets involved, edits don't matter, but evidence does. Still, Jasmine's been smart about timing. She's waiting, watching, and she knows what TLC is hoping for. That this fades, that people lose interest, that Gino moves on to a new storyline and the comment section forgets everything that happened. But the opposite is unfolding. Interest is growing. Slowly, quietly, the way storms do before they come in heavy. Fan accounts started comparing Jasmine's edit across seasons, catching subtle but sharp contrasts. In earlier episodes, she's fiery but sympathetic, fighting for love on foreign land. In her final appearances, she's frantic, impulsive, irrational. Not just a woman falling apart, but one edited to look like she deserves it. And viewers started asking questions producers weren't answering. Not outwardly, but in private DMs, podcast episodes, live stream comments. Comments like, wait, didn't she suddenly vanish? Or why did Gino stay and she didn't? Those questions don't go away, they multiply. And then there are the others. Cast members from different seasons, and even other TLC shows, who've seen their own experiences echo too closely. A former sibling show contestant anonymously told a journalist that they too were told filming scheduling would take their visa timelines into account, then watched filming delays complicate their approval. Another former fiancé from a now-canceled spinoff said when they expressed anxiety over legal issues during production, they were advised to just focus on the love story. Jasmine's story didn't launch a revolution, but it cracked a dam. Networks like TLC rely on viewer amnesia. They assume fans will move on with the next chaotic couple, get hooked by new fights and wedding drama. But this time, the silence speaks louder than the programming. Jasmine didn't just vanish. The show made her disappear. Completely. Like she was a glitch in their system. A test they failed. And buried. But buried things don't stay quiet forever, not if the person they tried to silence still has the facts. And Jasmine does. She's been told by a few cautious allies that a settlement's easier. Cleaner, less dramatic. Quiet money, non-disclosures, and a file that goes missing after enough time passes. But that's only if Jasmine agrees to disappear again. And this time, no one is betting she will. The real tension now hangs in the air, not on whether she'll speak, but when, and how much the show is willing to spin, distract, or deny before that moment hits. The truth doesn't need a platform right away. It just needs people willing to remember. Because no number of laughing memes or Gino solo storylines will erase the uncomfortable reality that for at least one cast member, the line between entertainment and real life was crossed without warning. TLDR? Jasmine was discarded. But now, she's dangerous. And if this wasn't an isolated case, how many more Jasmines are waiting to speak? Jasmine didn't fail the system. She believed it, trusted it, signed on thinking she'd found an opportunity, maybe even a fresh start. What she walked into was a carefully packaged machine hungry for reactions, but not responsibility. She wasn't just part of a storyline, she was the storyline, until keeping her around became inconvenient. And then, like a prop that had served its purpose, she was removed. No announcement, no explanation, just erased. This system rewarded her for being loud, dramatic, unstable, because that made content. Not because it reflected who she really was, but because it fit a structure designed to flatten complicated immigrant love stories into clickbait mess. The show cashed in on her breakdowns. It looped her frustrations into teasers. And when all of that became too real, when a personal moment turned into a legal threat and then an immigration disaster, they didn't step in. They stepped back. What Jasmine experienced wasn't an isolated glitch. It was a feature of how the industry works for the most vulnerable players in the game. Foreign casts carry stakes that the American co-stars don't. If something goes sideways, they don't get time or therapy. They get flagged, detained, deported. And all too often, they're also the ones most willing to trust producers, cling to storylines, keep filming even when it hurts, because they don't have the luxury of pulling out. The bigger story here isn't just what happened to Jasmine. It's the system that allowed it. A system that builds entire seasons off of emotional crisis, but avoids any trace of moral contract. These shows are structured like escape rooms. The cast gets trapped inside, and the people behind the wall keep moving the clues around. By the time you think you figured out the game, someone else already filmed your ending and clipped it for next Tuesday's promo. Jasmine's case is forcing a slow rethink. Not yet in public boardrooms, but in the quiet corners where cast members message each other and compare notes. Some of them are already realizing they had near misses. A lie they were told. A lawyer they should have called. A scene that, in hindsight, wasn't as voluntary as they believed. It's not just her anymore. It never was. This isn't about canceling TLC. This is about asking how many more stories were treated like hers. With silence, with paper-thin contracts, with storyline-first ethics where the fallout isn't part of the budget. And if the network can erase one person with no accountability, how many more have they quietly disappeared? Silence doesn't protect people. It protects brands. Reputation management is easier than conflict resolution. But what happens when the silence cracks? One person at a time. The producers who scrambled Jasmine's image to fit a season-long meltdown arc never imagined they were also creating someone who, when she finally saw through it, might fight back. Not with more drama, but with data, memory, and time. Jasmine gave them her unfiltered emotions. What they gave back was weaponized chaos. Now, she's sitting quietly with the same phone they once mic'd for every message and all the receipts they thought she'd forget. And there's still no accountability. No apology. No public recognition that a human being went from headline material to being flown out of the country like a problem you don't want to explain. If you'd blinked during the season break, you would have missed it altogether. And maybe that's the point. If the show didn't acknowledge it, did it really happen? It did. We know it did. And even now, the channel keeps going. New storylines, fresh cast, repeat drama. But the pieces don't fit like they used to. Not after Jasmine. Not once viewers start piecing together the gaps, the quiet removals, the sudden edits, the characters who vanish between confessionals without so much as a sentence. Reality TV isn't real. We know that. But when real-life consequences start replacing scripted breakups, the joke stops being funny. The crying woman on your screen might not be overreacting. She might be in legal trouble. The man stonewalling her might not be cold. He might be waiting for a lawyer to finish drafting a suit. And the silence from the network isn't caution. It's control. Jasmine's story has become more than content. It's become context. Now that it's out in the open, even in fragments, it changes the way we watch everything else. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe the next time a cast member disappears with no explanation, the question won't be, where did they go? It'll be, who failed them before they did? So then who's next? Because Jasmine's not the only one who vanished. And the more you look, the more you realize TLC has a list. Faces that once filled promo clips, now gone without a word. Why? And more disturbingly, why are they keeping quiet? That answer might already be filming.